Have you ever read the New Testament Gospels and thought there might be a hidden layer of meaning? Well, today we're diving into a really controversial theory that says exactly that these ancient texts might actually be a clever form of Roman political satire. All right, let's get into it. So let's start with one of the weirdest stories in the Gospels, the one about the demoniac of Gadara. You know it, Jesus casts a legion of demons out of a man, sends them into a herd of about 2,000 pigs, and then the pigs just run off a cliff and drown. On its face, the story is pretty baffling. The scholars behind this theory basically call it incoherent. It's not obvious what the moral is supposed to be. So what on earth is going on here? Well, the theory we're digging into, which comes mostly from the work of Joseph Atwell, argues that the key to unlocking stories like this isn't actually in the Bible at all. Instead, it suggests you have to read it side by side with a totally different book, a historical account of the First Roman-Jewish War. And that brings us to the core of this whole idea, the Josephus key. The entire argument really hangs on the relationship between two specific works from the first century. So on one hand, you have the Gospels, which tell the story of Jesus. On the other, you have The War of the Jews by a historian named Flavius Josephus. Now here's the kicker. Both were written at basically the same time, right after this incredibly brutal war. This theory says that's no coincidence. It's a deliberate literary connection. So how could that even work? Well, the idea is that the authors used a literary tool called typology. This is basically when you write a story where the characters and events are intentionally designed to mirror or be a type of the characters and events in another story. And in this case, the claim is that the gospel writers used the real history from Josephus's word journals as a kind of secret blueprint for the story of Jesus. Okay, let's see how this theory actually builds its case, starting right where both stories kick off, in the region of Galilee. Okay, so in the Gospels, Jesus is at the Sea of Galilee, and he gives that famous call to his disciples to become fishers of men. We think of it as this beautiful spiritual metaphor. But if you look at Josephus's history, at that exact same location, the Roman general Titus is attacking Jewish rebels. His soldiers sink their boats and then start spearing the men who are swimming for their lives, literally fishing them out of the water. This theory argues that this is a dark satirical joke, turning a holy metaphor into a brutal military reality. And this brings us right back to that bizarre story we started with. Remember? In the Gospels, at Gadara, a legion of demons possesses 2,000 pigs, who then drown. Now look at Josephus. At Gadara, Roman forces, part of a legion, are battling Jewish rebels. Josephus describes these rebels as acting like the wildest of wild beasts before they're driven into the water. And how many were captured? About 2,200. The theory connects the dots. The Roman legion is mocked as a legion of demons, and the Jewish rebels are denigrated as unclean swine. So what's the point of this story then? According to this viewpoint then, it's not about healing or faith at all. It's a political cartoon. As the source material puts it, the story, quote, simply denigrates the Sicarii as demons and unclean spirits, and the people they recruited as swine. It's seen as a way for the Roman rulers who sponsored Josephus, the Flavian dynasty, to mock their defeated enemies. Now, as the story in both texts moves south into Judea, the theory argues that the satire gets much, much darker, and it centers on the most sacred Jewish holiday of all, Passover. And I have to warn you, this next parallel is genuinely disturbing. In the Gospels, at Passover, we have Jesus, the son of Mary, offering his own flesh as a sacred meal, the Eucharist. But in Josephus's account of the siege of Jerusalem, which is also happening during Passover, a starving woman named Mary roasts and eats her own infant son, another son of Mary. The theory says this is an intentional parallel designed to juxtapose the holiest Christian ritual with an act of unimaginable horror from the war. And this is where the theory points to what it considers a kind of literary smoking gun. In the Gospel of Luke, there's this very specific, kind of unusual phrase. Jesus says a woman named Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall not be taken away from her. Josephus uses almost the exact same phrasing to describe the other Mary, the one who ate her child, saying she offered the rebels the fine portion of her son. The argument is, what are the chances of that specific, weird phrase showing up in both texts by accident? This all builds to the climax of both stories, which proponents of this view say is all about contrasting two competing messiahs, one who is Jewish and one who is Roman. So both stories have a huge event at the Mount of Olives. In the Gospels, this is where Jesus is captured, and we have that strange detail of a naked young man running away. Now check out Josephus. At the same place, the Roman commander Titus, who was fighting without his armor, you could say figuratively naked, he narrowly escapes being captured. The roles are completely flipped. The Jewish Messiah is taken, while the Roman commander, the symbol of Roman imperial power, gets away. So let's just break that down. Step 1, the Gospels showed the capture of the Jewish Messiah, Jesus. Step 2, Josephus shows the successful escape of the Roman commander Titus. Step 3, the theory argues that this contrast is the entire point, to separate the king who lives from the one who is crucified. It's all about showing who the real victor is. And then, of course, we get to the crucifixion itself. Jesus is crucified with 2 other men, and he dies. Now, in his history, Josephus tells this personal story about seeing 3 of his own friends being crucified. He begs Titus to have them taken down. 2 of them die, but 1 of them miraculously survives. The theory presents this as the ultimate satirical punchline. In the real historical version of the story, someone actually survives crucifixion. So who is the Joseph who gets these men down from the crosses? Well, in the Gospels, it's Joseph of Arimathea. In the history, it's Josephus himself, whose family name was Barmatheus. And here's the claim. Arimathea is just a literary pun on Bar Matthias, a way of secretly writing the historian Josephus himself into the gospel story. All right, the final set of parallels we're going to look at is maybe the most mind-bending. It presents a system where prophecies that Jesus makes in the Gospels are shown to literally come true in Josephus's history of the war. This last one just seems to fit almost too perfectly. At the end of his ministry, Jesus predicts the futures of his key apostles, Simon Peter and John. He says Simon will be bound and led to a death he doesn't want, but he says John will remain or live. Now fast forward to the end of the war, as recorded by Josephus. What happens to the 2 main rebel leaders? Their names are Simon and John. Simon is captured, bound in chains, and taken to Rome for his execution, a place he certainly did not wish to go. And John? His life is spared. He's sentenced to life in prison. He remains. So what do we do with all of this? Is it a historical blueprint for a new religion? A complex literary satire designed to create a peaceful messiah for a conquered people? Or are all these parallels, as detailed and specific as they are, just a series of really, really remarkable coincidences? The theory is definitely out there, but it challenges us to read these ancient texts in a completely new and maybe even unsettling way.